Tonight on Politicat, State of the Campus. ASG President Nehaarika Mulukutla stops by as Northwestern's fall quarter hits the halfway point.
Deal or no deal? The fate of the Iran deal now lies with Congress.
And healthy change? President Trump deals 2 blows to Obamacare.
All that and more tonight on Politicat. It's your political news right now. Good evening and welcome to Politicat. I'm Kendall.
And I'm Andrew Merica. We'll get to those stories and our panel in a moment, but first, this week's headlines. Negotiations over North Korea's nuclear program will continue, quote, until the first bomb drops. That comes from Secretary of State Rex Tillerson in an interview with CNN on Sunday. Secretary Tillerson said that President Trump, quote, is not seeking to go to war, but that he is ready if necessary. This comes 2 weeks after President Trump tweeted that Secretary Tillerson is, quote, wasting his time with the nuclear negotiations.
The Justice Department has sent a federal hate crimes lawyer to Iowa to assist in the prosecution of a man charged with killing a transgender teen last year. The New York Times reports that the order came directly from Attorney General Jeff Sessions, himself a highly unusual move given that Sessions is and has been one of the most outspoken social conservatives in American politics. As a senator, Sessions voted against the repeal of Don't Ask, Don't Tell and against the protection of sexual orientation under federal hate crime laws. As Attorney General, Sessions has continued to oppose protections for sexual orientation, ordering the Justice Department not to consider workplace discrimination of transgender people a violation of federal civil rights laws. This week's move could indicate the Justice Department is more willing to deal with violence against LGBT people on a case-by-case basis.
Jordi Sanchez and Jordi Cuixart, 2 leaders of the Catalonia independence movement, are in jail tonight for sedition after a referendum for Catalonia's independence turned violent on October 1st. The Spanish government, along with the Constitutional Court, declared the referendum illegal. Madrid is now threatening Catalonia with a revocation of its autonomous community status if it does not disown the referendum. Tens of thousands of protesters are flocking the streets of the Catalonian capital, Barcelona, in support of the 2 Jordis. And something new this week, the Global Recap, where we tell you what's happening in politics around the world. NNN's chief foreign correspondent Eric Miller joins us now with more. Eric?
Thanks, Andrew. Today, U.S.-backed forces seized ISIS's de facto capital of Raqqa in Syria, the last urban stronghold of the terror group. The victory marks the end of a 4-month battle to reclaim the city from ISIS control. But as the Islamic State faces retreat, new battlefronts may be emerging. Yesterday, the Iraqi government seized the city of Kirkuk from the Kurdish Defense Forces. Kirkuk falls outside the Kurdish autonomous region of Iraq, but has been held by Kurdish forces since 2014 and was included in the Kurdish independence referendum 3 weeks ago. That referendum was flatly rejected by the Iraqi government and the international community, and these actions by the Iraqi government may mark the reopening of sectarian strife in Iraq. In Europe, far-right parties won big in the Austrian parliamentary elections on Sunday. The biggest winner was the Austrian People's Party, which ran on an anti-immigrant, anti-Muslim platform. The victory comes less than a month after a far-right party won seats in Germany's parliament. And that'll do it for the Global Recap this week. Back to you guys.
And turning now from foreign elections to international agreements, President Trump said Friday that he would not certify the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, a deal reached by the Obama administration with Iran, to stop the country's pursuit of nuclear weapons. Politicat's Ben Trachtenberg sat down with an expert to talk about what that means.
We're joined now by Sidra Hamidi. She's a PhD candidate at Northwestern, researching in political science, specifically nuclear states and the relations between nuclear and non-nuclear states. Sidra, thank you so much for joining us.
Yeah, no problem.
How important was the deal that the Obama administration negotiated with Iran in ensuring that Iran doesn't get nuclear weapons and ensuring peace in the Middle East?
Yeah, so there's two parts to that question. So the first part is peace in the region. And that's a difficult question, I think, because while it definitely helped the relationship between the US and Iran, it also sort of made other parts of, diplomatic relations that the U.S. has in the Middle East sort of more tense. Whether or not it solved all of those sort of complex diplomatic relations is a difficult question.
So we're seeing President Trump aggressively push back on this deal. He was critical of it during the campaign trail. Now that he's in the Oval Office, he's said publicly now that he will not certify the deal. What are the implications of this deal unraveling?
It's a difficult question. It already seems like it's the case, and there have been some public statements that Iranian officials have given, that they're sort of not viewing the U.S. as credible in keeping its commitments to this deal, but also to general international agreements, that sort of thing.
All right, Sidra, thank you so much for joining us.
And thank you, Ben, for that.
Now we'd like to welcome our panel. Joining us now is Rachel Frazin, Managing Editor of NBN, and Dominic Beyer of NU College Republicans. Rachel, Dominic, thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having us.
All right, so let's get started. So by refusing to certify the Iran nuclear deal, President Trump has effectively placed responsibility in the hands of Congress. What do you think is going to happen there, Rachel?
Well, Republicans for a very long time have not been in favor of the Iran deal. That being said, I haven't before Trump sort of heard many people advocating for them to just immediately pull out either. So I don't know. They might recertify it. They might not. They might try to renegotiate. I feel like all of those things are on the table. You never really know.
All right, so Dominic, Republicans have been hostile to the deal for a while now, but faced with the prospect of actually killing it, will they?
It's kind of hard to tell. It's still a bit early. You have Iran hawks such as Tom Cotton and Bob Corker are trying to come up with a new plan, while you have others like Marco Rubio, who stated that he doesn't think it's possible to save the deal. So it's still a bit too early to tell. It'll be interesting to see how this plays out.
And do you think this is a good deal?
I think it's not a good deal. It's got a lot of issues. First of all, it sunsets after 10 years. So after 10 years, Iran can just keep on developing nuclear weapons. Its enforcement provisions are extremely weak. Iran determines when we can send inspectors into their country. They can determine where they go. So we can't really keep a good eye on what they're doing. And also, they're still able to continue doing research and development. So even if they don't continue developing nuclear weapons for the next 10 years, after 10 years, they're going to have all the technology necessary to build a bomb.
And Rachel, do you think this is a mechanism of control, or is it kind of like a surrender?
The deal itself or the pulling out? The deal. I think that, as you pointed out, the deal does have some issues, but I think at where we are now, I think a lot more by pulling out would be destabilized than would be helped. I feel like at least by having this deal, we do have UN inspectors going into these, going into Iran's nuclear facilities and inspecting them. We do have some word from Iran. Whether or not they'll keep to their word is a separate issue, that they will not do this for at least 10 years. Yes, if we could have them not doing it indefinitely, that would be a better deal. But I think that if we were to pull out right now, we would get nothing, and it would just provoke the Iranians, and especially the new president, who has been a little bit more on the moderate side, I feel like just provoking them is not wise.
Dominic, you think something is better than nothing? You said you don't like it, but...
So ideally, we could have a deal with Iran that would address all these issues, that would get them to stop developing nuclear weapons, and that would have sufficient enforcement mechanisms to deter them. But if we can't have a deal that's going to solve these problems, I think we'd rather have no deal at all and stick with our allies, Israel and Saudi Arabia in the area. I think standing up with our allies is more important than giving concessions to Iran.
So then, if we pull out of this deal, what does the U.S. get from decertifying?
We'd have renewed pressure on Iran to stop developing, because we'd reimpose these sanctions on them. And those sanctions were killing their economy. President Obama imposed sanctions on Iran, which brought them to the negotiating table. And if we reimpose those sanctions, their economy is going to go down the tank again. And they're going to be more likely to want to negotiate with us again and give us concessions and stop developing nuclear weapons.
Is that a risk? I don't know. I feel like we shouldn't be willing to take that risk. I think we can still have a debate with them and offer them more things, more economic aid without scrapping everything we've done so
right.
far.
I definitely want us to continue negotiating with Iranians. But if they're not willing to give up the development of nuclear weapons and make sure that's not going to happen, then I think we should pull out.
You feel confident?
And risk a nuclear Iran?
I think
that now has no reason to
right
stop
now with the
developing
deal,
nuclear weapons?
we're still risking a nuclear Iran. This deal is not doesn't have sufficient mechanisms to make sure we're not going to have a nuclear Iran. So, like, we might actually help stop a nuclear Iran more by pulling out.
Do you feel confident in the president's leadership with this?
I'm definitely confident in the president. I trust the president and the people working on his administration.
But the president has no foreign policy experience, has no foreign policy expertise.
But
Why do
the
we?
people on his cabinet, Secretary TILLERSON, Secretary Mattis.
Aren't they in a spat right now? How long is Tillerson still going to be there?
I have no idea. That's a whole separate issue. But the person really in charge of Iran's and the policy regarding Iran, Secretary Mattis, has had extensive experience, and he knows the issues we're facing, and I trust in him too.
Dominic makes a good point. Secretary Mattis, this is somebody who's very widely respected. You still don't feel confident with him even behind Trump?
I don't know. I feel like, yes, Mattis does have all this expertise, and if he were the sole arbiter of this decision, that would make me feel much more at ease, much more comfortable, but I feel like Trump is such a powder keg. I don't know. I feel like you never know these days.
All right, final word, Dominic?
I'll pass.
All right, well, we'll end this here then. We'll be talking healthcare right after this.
At Northwestern, we're wildcats in every way.
Northwestern break right through that. With our colors flying, we will cheer you all to go. Go you Northwestern, fight for the sweet victory, for the fame of our fair name, and go Northwestern, win that game. Go Cats!
Healthcare is making headlines again. This time, President Trump is taking action without Congress, giving 2 blows to Obamacare with executive orders.
The biggest change that comes is the elimination of subsidies to health insurance companies that help low-income people pay out-of-pocket costs.
Members of both parties have condemned this act. The executive order will likely reduce the number of people insured despite the president's promise of more access and better affordable coverage. So let's go to our panel now for a deeper dive on this topic. Many of his strongest opponents in his base benefit from these subsidies. So what benefits does Trump see this having? Dominic, we'll start with you.
I think this is getting the taxpayers off the hook for paying for these insurance companies bailing them out of the gigantic costs imposed by Obamacare. This is President Trump standing with the people who have to undergo the strong penalties imposed by Obamacare. And I don't think it's fair for an ordinary, hard-working taxpayer to have to make sure that these companies make a profit.
So you think an ordinary, hardworking taxpayer who's sick, should just have to pay a higher premium?
No, I think what President Trump is doing is he's enacting policies that reduce the regulatory burdens imposed by Obamacare to drive down the prices of healthcare. And if he gets his way, we're going to get cheaper and more affordable healthcare available to more people. And yeah, he's decreasing the burdens imposed by Obamacare. It would have been much better if we'd passed a plan that would repeal Obamacare. Sadly, that didn't happen, and so that's why President Trump has to turn to these executive orders.
But when you say more people, you don't point out which people. Like, this plan is going to disproportionately hurt the sick people because it's going to be able to pull, healthy people are going to now be able to pull out, and so now there are going to be more sick people in the pool, so their premiums are going to skyrocket. So yes, more people might have cheaper healthcare premiums, but our sickest Americans, our most vulnerable people won't have those opportunities.
Yeah, but we still have programs that will catch these people if their costs go beyond a certain level. We still have Medicare there to save these people. So I don't see how
well,
this is
I mean,
an
what
issue.
about middle class? What about the middle? What about the sick middle class?
Yeah, so this is addressing middle class,
conditions.
the rising cost of premiums for the middle class by reducing all these regulations that drive up the cost of healthcare.
No, but my point is, the poor people, our lowest income Americans might be caught by Medicare, which is good, obviously.
Right.
But the people in the middle who are not low income enough for Medicare, but who still have pre-existing conditions could not be able to get a cheap plan outside of Obamacare.
Okay, but this plan isn't getting rid of the pre-existing conditions mandate. That's still in place. What it's saying is people.
No, but now more people will be able to pull out of the deal, so then premiums will.
Yeah,
okay, let's let Dominic finish his thought. You can go.
Yeah, but this allows people to go get healthcare, form associations to get healthcare, and they can negotiate with these insurance companies and drive the prices down. And it also
for
gets
themselves or for everyone.
For themselves, and that's an aggregate that's going to lead to lower costs for people.
But those people, but not the sick people who have pre-existing conditions, who are benefited by Obamacare, who, when these healthy people go out and the pool is of fewer people, will have to pay higher premiums for pre-existing conditions, even though that's not a proponent of the deal. The way the deal is, the way this is set up is that now more people can opt out of Obamacare. The people who are going to do that are the people who normally would pay lower rates. Yeah, but those are people who do not have illnesses that and are not helped by Obamacare. So the people who are helped by Obamacare will essentially lose those benefits. And yes, the very poor will be subsidized by Medicaid and Medicare, but the people in the middle who are not low income enough or old enough for Medicaid and Medicare will not be able to afford health insurance. Essentially, the middle class people who are ill.
Well, the American people can't really afford health insurance nowadays. Obama's led to skyrocketing premiums. This is affecting everybody. So what Trump is doing is he's deregulating part of the healthcare industry, allowing companies to offer plans that are much cheaper for people and people to associate and get these cheaper plans. I don't see how that's going to lead to higher costs for everybody. Right now, what's happening is everybody's facing higher costs.
Yes, but the higher costs are to offset the high costs that these insurance companies would normally pay for people with pre-existing conditions. People with pre-existing conditions are not going to opt out of Obamacare because they are covered under Obamacare. Only healthy people are going to opt out of Obamacare. So that leaves only sick people left, and so that is going to cost more to cover them. And so now the people who are left in Obamacare, namely these people, are going to pay higher premiums.
Yeah, but these people aren't going out of the health insurance market. They're buying other plans that aren't as regulated, that are cheaper, and that cost insurance companies less. So I don't see how you're taking these people out of the market. They're not driving the cost of premiums up.
This is a great discussion. Unfortunately, we have run out of time for this block. We've had a lot of discussion with this. Hopefully Congress can do the same thing. Thanks to our panelists, Rachel and Dominic. You guys were fantastic. Love to have you back soon. And after this, more Politicat. Stay with us.
We actually could have.
At Northwestern, we're wildcats in every way.
Northwestern, break right through that. With our colors flying, we will cheer you all to go. Go you Northwestern, fight for victory, sweet victory, for the fame of our fair name, and go Northwestern, win that game. Go Cats!
This week marks the halfway point of fall quarter. As midterms all but consume campus, we wanted to check in with Northwestern's associated government to see what progress has been made since the start of school. We are joined now by ASG President Nehaarika Mulukutla. Thank you for being with us.
Thank you.
So, can you first tell us, for the students watching at home, what is the most tangible thing that you're working on right now that's going to affect students' lives directly?
Yeah, so we're actually thinking, we have a new project in the works that we're really hoping is going to get off the ground. It is in its preliminary stages, but if we can do this, everyone's lives will be so much happier. We're completely overhauling and revamping the SOFO system. An in-house project. If we have enough time over the course of the next year, our very own Vice President of Public Relations is actually going to design from scratch a SOFO app. We're going to have it developed in-house, and we're going to basically see what ways we can make students' lives easier with just getting money for their student organizations and figuring out how those transactions work, getting reimbursements, all of that, and even those interpersonal interactions that occur.
Can you explain a little more about what SOFO is and how it affects students?
Yeah, so it's essentially the way that any student organization would be able to get its student allocated funding. So any of the student activities fee that is allocated to any student organization over the course of a funding cycle over fall or spring quarter, all of that money actually runs through the SOFO department. And so as a result, there's a lot of interactions that students have with SOFO just centered, that are high stress situations that are centered around like, hey, I need this money to print a magazine immediately and we don't have it in our account, how do we handle this? Or what's going on with the reimbursement? I paid $600 out of pocket and I need that back in my pocket right now. And just generally speaking, more often than not, situations with money we want to make as easy as possible. So SOFO is one of the biggest things that directly relates students, and that's one of our biggest term initiatives, yeah.
And another big term initiative that you have has to do with mental health, and you're already working with established Northwestern programs such as CARE and WildChat. Can you tell us more about what you're doing with these programs that are already in place on campus?
Yeah, so we've actually had a lot of great headway with all of these. It was actually kind of hard to pick what the most tangible thing was because we're making a lot of progress. So with WildChat, we're actually talking about ways to get them course credit or stipends to be a listener, and we're pushing out a whole new line of publicity for their calling lines. So just an alternative way for students to feel like they have access to resources on a campus if they don't necessarily feel like they belong here. We're also looking at CARE training because there's so much possibility for us to be able to mandate training for students across the board and basically impact campus culture throughout all the student organizations that we have on campus. And Aaron Clark has been really receptive to these ideas. So there's a lot of progress happening with that as well. In fact, probably by the end of the quarter, we'll see some results. And we even had a pretty frank and vulnerable conversation earlier today with Jabbar Bennett just about there are some real and serious issues about caps that we've seen, and it doesn't at all negate any of the hard work, that hours and hours of work that administration, senior level leadership, and the therapists are putting into making this campus a better place. But there are certainly some problem areas that we want to address, and that conversation I think went very well. It was tough. It was a tough one to have for myself personally, but it was one that I think has a lot of outcomes for the students.
That's great to hear about, that you guys are tackling mental health and all these other really important initiatives to students. And another one that you had spoken about when you came on our show last year was about alcohol policy. Could you maybe give us just a quick update about what ASG has done so far this year in regards to Northwestern's alcohol policies on campus?
Yeah, so actually over the summer we put together a student leadership proposal that was centered around what all needs to be done to make alcohol policy equitable for students across campus. And what that looks like for us was bringing together all 4 Greek councils, sustaining some input from SSDP, and we also tried to reach out to SHAPE and bringing on basically just anyone who would feel like their voice was heard, and creating a proposal to senior leadership about the different areas that need to be addressed. So one predominantly being that drinking occurs where it does on a campus, or where a lot of us know in certain basements of certain institutions, and how can we address that and make it safer for students. And then another big one is off campus being a really big spot that we just simply can't regulate and don't have access to, and actually ends up being a very unsafe space for students across the board. So just in general, we've been working a lot on that proposal, and it's moving forward. Yeah.
Great. Thank you. That's all the time we have for now. If you have an initiative that you want Northwestern student government to pay attention to, make sure to head over to their website at asg.northwestern.edu, and we'll be right back.
At Northwestern, we're wildcats in every way.
will cheer you all the go. Go you Northwestern, fight for victory, sweet victory, spread for the fame of our fair name, and go Northwestern, win that game. Go Cats!
And now here's Tyler with tonight's final word.
The views expressed in this segment are not necessarily the views of NNN or Northwestern University. They are the views of the Politicat editorial staff. Me Too. A very simple phrase, it rolls off of our tongues on a daily basis. Me Too illustrates the power of a common bond. Me Too echoed across social media this weekend. In light of the recent sexual assault allegations against Hollywood producer Harvey Weinstein, mostly women took to tweeting, posting, and snapping Me Too in order to show the scope that harassment and assault has reached in our country. Only now each instance of Me Too was spoken, there was a new weight to the words. For some, the phrase "pride from clenched jaws" released from where it had festered for months or years or even decades, always there but too often buried away. It was an instance of togetherness as people began to share memories that were too often dismissed as valued topics for conversation. It began on Sunday when actress Alyssa Milano tweeted, quote, "Suggested by a friend, if all the women who have been sexually harassed or assaulted wrote Me Too as a status, we might give people a sense of the magnitude of the problem." A simple phrase, yet it has all the intricacies of power and wrong-placed guilt, denial and confusion and hurt. A simple phrase, yet so impactful it brought people from all walks of life with all different experiences together. Me Too includes everyone brave enough to share their stories and those who don't feel safe enough to. And those stories have complexities we can't even begin to imagine. The boss, the coworker, the mentor, the family member, the boyfriend, the stranger. According to the Rape, Abuse, and Incest National Network, an American is sexually assaulted every 98 seconds. Last week in a New York Times opinion piece by Mayim Balak, she wrote, quote, "I dress modestly, I don't act flirtatiously with men as a policy." And that, quote, "In a perfect world, women should be free to act however they want, but our world isn't perfect." We need to remember that when it comes to reasons for sexual assault, it doesn't have to do with how a woman dresses or whom she aspires to be. It has to do with one reason only, and that's how the man acted. These men need to stop being perpetrators and need to stop silencing women who try to raise their voices. But it's on women to support other women too. We need to let each other know that they can scream "Me Too" at the top of their lungs and they will be heard and supported and loved. The Me Too movement shows that in collectiveness, there is strength. In the short term, there's a little bit of change. Weinstein was fired from his company. He will never be looked at or trusted again. His name forever soiled with the disgusting legacy he will leave. But we need to think about the bigger picture. Unless women are made to feel comfortable enough to say Me Too sooner, this issue is going to grow bigger and bigger. We aren't going to live in a society anytime soon where sexual assault is non-existent. But the first step to getting there is letting perpetrators know there will be consequences to their actions. The only way to do that is to not let women's voices be stifled. We should strive to live in a society where Me Too doesn't come out after the fact, but right when it happens. We need to eliminate the fear of repercussions or of being silenced. A society where every day we tell our daughters and mothers and sisters and friends and lovers their voices are valued and important. And the only way to do that is by supporting, listening, and understanding the victims. And that's the final word.
All right, thank you, Tyler, and thank you for joining us. Good night.